US President Donald Trump is accusing South Africa of human rights violations against its white farmers. He's cut assistance that includes critical HIV medication. But why is he targeting South Africa? And what role does South African-born Elon Musk play in this? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finighan. US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order suspending direct assistance to South Africa. He cited a law that allows the South African government to seize farmland and its genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice for his decision. Trump's order also directs the State Department to help Afrikaners, an ethnic group descended from European settlers, through refugee programs. South African-born billionaire advisor to Trump, Elon Musk, is also accusing the country of what he calls openly racist land ownership laws. But President Cyril Ramaphosa says the facts on the ground tell a different story. White South Africans make up a little over 7% of the population, but they own 70% of all privately owned farmland. So what's behind Trump's move to go after South Africa? And is humanitarian aid being weaponized? We'll get to our guests in just a moment. But first, a report from Joel Evans.
Numerous fronts are being covered before.
Within hours of taking office, President Donald Trump signed an executive order freezing all foreign aid for 90 days. His pen stroke turned the lives of 8.5 million HIV patients who were receiving treatment at USAID-funded clinics in South Africa upside down.
We are concerned about the potential impact of the decision by the United States government to suspend some of its funding for HIV and TB programs in African countries.
Previous US administrations had prioritized widespread free access to antiretroviral treatment. In 2003, President George W. Bush established PEPFAR. That's the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. It's considered one of the most successful foreign aid programs in history and is estimated to have saved more than 26 million lives in 55 countries.
Take over, Elijah, take over.
But it's not just HIV funding that's at the heart of the dispute between the US and South Africa. Trump also froze direct assistance to the country, citing a controversial law that allows the South African government to seize farmland, in rare cases without compensation. A move that Donald Trump says is unfairly targeting white farmers.
Terrible things are happening in South Africa. The leadership is doing some terrible things, horrible things. So that's under investigation right now. We'll make a determination. And until such time as we find out what South Africa is doing, they're taking away land, they're confiscating land.
White South Africans, who are a small minority, still own the vast majority of farmland, which has been a source of racial tensions for decades. President Ramaphosa says his country is resilient and will not be bullied. Perhaps it's this resilience and decades of apartheid rule that underlines South Africa's most recent moves on the international stage. In late 2023, South Africa launched a case at the International Court of Justice accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza. The court concluded that it was plausible that Israel's actions in Gaza could amount to genocide. And Trump used the case to accuse South Africa of taking an aggressive position towards the US and its ally Israel. Joel Evans, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
So let's bring in our guests. And today they're all joining us from South Africa. In Johannesburg is Mark Heywood, National and Global Health Specialist. In Stellenbosch, Tanveer Jeewa, a specialist on constitutional property law. And in Cape Town, Melanie Verwoerd, a political analyst and former member of Parliament for the ANC under President Nelson Mandela. Welcome to you all. Melanie, let's start with you. Is humanitarian aid being weaponized by the Trump administration?
Well, yes, clearly it is, because, we are a sovereign nation, we are a democratic nation, and we have the right, surely, to determine some of our domestic policies. But what makes this even more troubling is the fact that it's completely based on falsehoods, and it's completely arbitrary. There has been no expropriation of land in South Africa since 1994. Of course, there was large-scale expropriation from colonial times and under apartheid, but there has been zero forceful or any form of expropriation of private land in South Africa since 1994. And it would have been one of the most popular things for the ANC government to have done, or if they wanted to, but they didn't. They chose not to. So it is just completely and utterly false. And I'm sure, as some of your other guests will show today to you as well, it isn't completely in line with our constitution. There is no change in the government's policy of keeping it with a willing buyer, willing seller. And it is also in line completely with most democratic countries in the West's expropriation laws, including that of America, and the UK, and Ireland, and the European Union. So to use aid in such a crude, arbitrary manner to apparently punish the South African government, but of course actually just punishing the poorest of the poor, is really, really the wrong thing to do, and he's certainly weaponizing it.
But Melanie, what's he punishing South Africa for? What's your suspicion here? What's the motivation behind this?
Well, I think, first of all, what happened is that a very small right-wing grouping in South Africa that claims to be on behalf of Afrikaans people, and can I just say I'm Afrikaans, and they certainly don't speak on my behalf, but that they have had the ear of right-wing think tanks in America, and then, of course, President Trump. This is not the first time things like this have happened. It also happened under Trump 1, and presumably that of Elon Musk. And therefore, that's the first thing that I think happened. They're pushing their own agenda, whatever that might be. I think they've now backpedaling a little bit because they've seen that this is not quite working out the way they wanted it to. And then possibly there could be other things, such as the ICJ case, with, that's been brought up a number of times, and that this is also a punishment for that.
Mark, what does the freezing of aid mean for anyone dealing with an HIV positive status in South Africa, or indeed those suffering with AIDS?
Well, put most simply, it is a threat to the life and health of tens of thousands of people living with HIV in South Africa. 2 weeks ago, a whole range of organizations that have been receiving stable funding from PEPFAR received letters ordering an immediate cease to work. The day after, 15,000 healthcare workers and an additional number of people who provided administrative support stopped providing healthcare services upon the order of the US government, of the funder. Those people were working in 27 high-burden, high-prevalence districts. Those institutes provide critical research, critical training, critical monitoring, and critical infrastructure. And, South Africa has the biggest HIV epidemic in the world, 7.8 million people. We've had a very successful HIV treatment response with the support of the United States, I must say, where we've managed to get nearly 6 million people onto treatment. But, providing perhaps one of the world's biggest HIV or one of the world's biggest medical programs overall is always very fragile, always very vulnerable. And this threatens to bring parts of it crashing down. So, as Melanie said, this is weaponizing of humanitarian aid and hitting the most vulnerable, the most defenseless, and going to cause a lot of illness and suffering.
I have a feeling you've answered my next question, Mark, which is, can South Africa continue to afford to treat those who are HIV positive? Could it absorb this shock? Does it need external funding?
Financially, it could possibly absorb the shock, which is very different from our neighboring countries like Zimbabwe or Malawi or Botswana, who are also dependent. Financially, yes, but as I tried to explain, the healthcare workers who have been ordered to stop work are not replaceable. You can replace the money for medicines, but you can't replace the expertise, the institutional memory, the understanding of the healthcare system. And that's where we are going to pay a heavy price. If I can just say, I'm on the board of directors of an organization called the Treatment Action Campaign, which was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize for its work on HIV 20 years ago. The TAC has received substantial funding for clinic monitoring and to try to make sure that the quality of clinics is maintained to enable people to take their treatment regularly. As we speak now, the Treatment Action Campaign is under an order, which we received on Friday, to put 140 staff on immediate suspension to stop all programs, and it is a threat to the life and the future of the Treatment Action Campaign. That's how multidimensional and serious this punitive, inexplicable measure is.
Let's bring in Tanveer then. Thanks for your patience, Tanveer. Why is this Land Expropriation Act so controversial?
It's important to remember the background of the act, right? It's obviously been into place as a bill for the past 5 years now, but also trying to remember the fact that it's been into place in a different form of a bill from 2008. So it's been really contentious. But there's one main section that seems to be putting a lot of people in a sort of discomfort, and that's the section that relates to the compensation, right? And that section talks about the nil compensation, the fact that you can expropriate with nil compensation. And that seems to be putting a lot of people with discomfort because it talks about just an equitable compensation, and it offers no compensation under certain circumstances. It's important to not listen to propaganda and to list those circumstances. One of those examples would be if the land is abandoned. In these circumstances, we would be looking at where people haven't paid municipal rates for years on end, or if it can be proven that the land has been abandoned, or if the land is posing some sort of risk, right? So we're not looking at farmland in those cases, even though Donald Trump seems to be constantly talking about white landowners in terms of farmland. That's not what we're looking at here. But yet, because there has been so much propaganda around these farm owners, this seems to be the main issue with the act at the moment, being the compensation in this case.
So let's get something straight, Tanveer. Is South Africa confiscating land, to quote President Trump, from certain classes which are treated very badly, he said?
There are two main parts of the statement, right? Is South Africa confiscating land? Absolutely not, right? Expropriation of land is not new. Neither in South Africa nor around the world. Expropriation of land exists in America as well, and it happens very routinely. Secondly, in South Africa, under the new act, land has not been expropriated yet. And thirdly, when we read the act, which I need to stress that many people have not done in South Africa, and I would be surprised if President Donald Trump himself has actually read the act, because the act does not refer to race. Right? It does not refer to specific race of landowners. It talks about the kind of property. There seems to be a sort of inference from people around the world talking about this act, people in South Africa talking about this act, that it's referring to certain kinds of landowners. It doesn't refer to race. So no, South Africa is not confiscating land. There is a procedure that needs to take place. The procedure almost has 18 sorts of steps. The court has to step in, right? The court has to measure the compensation that goes in. There are so many steps that goes in, and it has to comply with the Constitution. There is absolutely no arbitrary confiscation of land that is going on. And expropriation is very routine in every democratic state around the world. It's very normal.
Melanie, I saw you laughing when I was quoting President Trump there.
Yes, because it is so absurd. I mean, and I think all South Africans, we can't decide, do we laugh about it or do we cry about it? If it wasn't for the horrific humanitarian effects that it's having, it's actually laughable. Because if anything, the South African government has been bending backwards to make sure that there is no discrimination based on race since 1994. And today, if you look at this country, still disproportionately whites, and also that includes Afrikaans-speaking whites, still benefit from the remnants or the intergenerational benefits that they can reap from apartheid days. They are still proportionally far more affluent than the majority of Black South Africans. Black South Africans still have to bear the burden of not only poverty, but also of violence, of bad healthcare, etc. If there are certain classes in this country which is treated badly, it is certainly not the whites, quite the opposite. And it's, it is, like I said in the beginning, just completely based on falsehoods. Also, about farmland. And I am glad that the previous speaker also corrected the fact that this is not about farmland. I have both my families come from farming backgrounds, but this act is not about farmland. And in fact, the government is far more short of urban and peri-urban land. So to create this impression that the poor white farmers are now being attacked by government is just, all whites in general, is just not correct.
Melanie, I'll be back with you in just a second. I just want to break away to read you a tweet that on Wednesday, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio posted on X saying that he won't attend the G20 summit in Johannesburg. He wrote, "South Africa is doing very bad things, expropriating private property, using G20 to promote solidarity, equality and sustainability. In other words, DEI and climate change. My job is to advance America's national interests, not waste taxpayer money or coddle anti-Americanism." What do you make of that? Relations between South Africa and the US have been deteriorating for quite some time. This didn't start under the Trump administration, isn't it? In May 2023, the US ambassador to South Africa accused the country of supplying weapons to Russia for its war against Ukraine through a cargo ship that docked at a naval base near Cape Town. This has been going on for some time, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. And I don't think it is. South Africa still values relationships with America. It's not that South Africa, they are a major trading partner of ours. So it is important for us to keep relationships. But I think one needs to be very cautious when it becomes quite apparent that everything around the foreign policy becomes transactional from one party. And as our president said, where there then becomes there's a very distinct possibility that this is just being bullied in a certain direction. South Africans, as most of Africa, is very sensitive about the idea of being asked to beg for aid. And I think this has been something that has been bugging South Africa a lot. And yes, you are right that the previous ambassador's accusations, which according to our government's research and a deep investigation said was not true, caused a lot of damage because it also caused a lot of economic damage to our country within a couple of days. So yes, relationships have not been that strong, but I think South Africa is still keen to build on those relationships, but from a position of strength, not from a position of weakness and, like I said, having to go in a sense of being, wanting to beg the American government for aid.
Mark, what are we to make of Elon Musk's claim that only 10% of foreign assistance dollars actually reaches the communities they're intended to help? The implication being that the remaining 90% is diverted, stolen or wasted. It sounds from what you were saying earlier that every penny of the money that South Africa gets from the US is being spent incredibly wisely.
Yeah, I don't know where Elon Musk gets his facts, so-called facts from, because they are totally wrong. And statements like that are, frankly, utter nonsense, and he should be put to prove them. I can say, with the HIV program, that money is very well spent and that it does save lives, and it plays an absolutely critical role in our healthcare system because, South Africa, as with many developing countries, have a much higher burden of disease than many developed countries. Apart from HIV, we're dealing with malaria, we're dealing with tuberculosis, we're dealing with more rare and neglected diseases. We've got epidemics of non-communicable diseases like cancer, like diabetes. So we really are in a whirlwind. So this type of global support from the United States and from other countries really helps. And it helps as well at a time when our country is financially constrained, our health budget cannot meet the demands of people. And health is a global issue, as we've seen with COVID-19. Actually, it's in the United States' interests to support disease prevention and disease treatment all over the world, because in the 21st century, disease no longer sticks within national boundaries. So this type of approach, ultimately, not only is it based on lies and disinformation, but it will prove to be self-defeating of the American people as well. And that will be an utter tragedy.
What kind of impact will, you've outlined how it's going to affect people in South Africa. What kind of impact will the cutting of aid have upon people throughout the region?
Well, it'll be devastating. People are already going to clinics and they are no longer able to get their treatment there. The medicines are no longer being purchased. It threatens a very, very serious setback in the HIV epidemic. We have been gradually gaining control over HIV globally for the last 20 years. This comes perhaps as the biggest threat. And remember, we've been focused on COVID-19 and other threats, but the HIV pandemic has not gone away. HIV has not ceased in its virulence. It has not ceased in its infectivity. If people stop taking antiretroviral treatment, then they become more infectious, because one of the benefits of antiretroviral treatment, which is paid for in many countries by the PEPFAR program, is it reduces what's called viral load or infectivity. So treatment has a prevention benefit. It has a containing benefit on the HIV epidemic. And again, in an era of pandemic threat, one of the things the world does not want to have to deal with is a resurgent HIV epidemic and tuberculosis epidemic that goes with it. So it is just so tragic and so stupid to take measures like this. Its harm is enormous.
Tanveer, let's go back to this issue of land expropriation. Why is land ownership still such a contentious issue 30 years after the end of apartheid?
It's because of something you've mentioned earlier when we started, which is the fact that basically there hasn't been much of a dent in land ownership, right? It's very skewed towards the white population at the moment. So obviously in 1994, when apartheid ended, there was a level of land ownership with the white population, and not so much so with the black population, and that's including with the Indian population and colored population. As time went on, the Indian population has managed to climb a little bit higher over the social class echelons and managed through the financial market to be able to buy more land, but not so much so with the colored population and the black population, right? Unfortunately, land reform has failed. It has been way too slow, and the same can be said about the housing program. And it has been left with black people having to fend their way through the private housing market. They have been having to buy their way through the market, and that's been absolutely impossible with the rates of inflation. And with the failing housing market, it has absolutely been impossible for them to be able to make it so far. And what has happened is the fact that now we are absolutely left with informal settlements and high rates of unlawful occupation, which then means that we have absolutely millions of people who are landless in South Africa. So what this means is that we have very high rates of land ownership amongst a small white population, right? And high rates of landlessness amongst the black population, and a failing land reform program. So obviously the land issue is very contentious in South Africa. And when even we have something as minor as one clause in an expropriation act that seeks to make a minor dent in land ownership, it causes so much upheaval that we have right-wing groups going to other countries to try and cause some upheaval in this South Africa. It obviously causes even more tension, right? It's some sort of contention in the psyche of South Africa that we can absolutely not detach from the person.
Melanie, let's come back to South African-born Elon Musk. I think we all have the suspicion that perhaps President Trump is being influenced by Musk. How do people there in South Africa feel about him and his motivations?
Before I get to Elon Musk, maybe just 2 points. The one is, of course, that it is so important for us to deal with our land issue, because if we don't, we saw what happened in Zimbabwe. So it is really, really important that South Africa, for the stability of South Africa and also the region, deals with its land issue in a just and fair way, which it will continue to do, but it has to deal with it. We can't be like Zimbabwe was decades after democracy and still have the vast majority of land in the hands of the privileged minority groups. And secondly, I just also want to say, even though PEPFAR makes out the majority of funding in South Africa, it's also important to note that there are other funding affected by this. For example, wildlife crime funding has been cut now as part of the aid package. And that is a very big problem for us as well and affects the whole region. Equally so, also funding to NGOs have been cut. And then also we've seen a very rapid decline in philanthropy funding, which is not through the state, but following in the line of, the sort of same thread as the government. Around Elon Musk, well, I think South Africans are, it's hard to say what South Africans in general think. There are definitely some people who like him, of course, but there are certainly a huge amount of South Africans, and I think that has grown dramatically since the weekend, who really do not appreciate what he is saying about South Africa and what he has been now causing South Africa. I mean, he hasn't lived in South Africa for a very long time. The fact that his grandparents came from Canada, apparently, from dubious political backgrounds, it is a problem. And so South Africans are not particularly from us.
Mark, final answer. Here you are, global platform, okay? You're on Al Jazeera right now. What is your message to the Trump administration and the people of the US who think that somehow cutting aid like this is a good idea?
My message is simple again. It is rescind this executive order in totality, immediately, resume funding to South Africa and to other developing countries, resume funding to the World Health Organization, which plays an absolutely critical coordinating role within the world. And my message to the people of America, if the president chooses not to listen to us, is use every means within your democratic power to force change, because we are one world. Our pain will become your pain before too long. We depend upon your solidarity and support as countries that have been historically disadvantaged. And we stand with you in all of your efforts to restore genuine democracy to the United States of America.
And there, we must end it. Many thanks indeed. Mark Heywood, Tanveer, Jeewa, and Melanie Verwoerd. Thanks for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us on our Facebook page. You'll find that at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle there is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.